Welcome to A Lot of Fortune, a cosmic podcast with me, Danny Darling.
And I'm Natty.
And this is episode 2, where we discuss eclipses. The word eclipse comes from the Greek word meaning abandonment. They are visually significant lunar events, new moons and full moons. And on that topic, Ann Dillard on Total Eclipse said, "The universe was riven. We were standing on a furrowed field on the face of the earth in silence, and a black hole was in the sky." And one of the most exciting things about an eclipse is not only the extraordinary visual aspect of the eclipse, but the subsequent and or adjacent drama that surrounds an eclipse on many levels, right?
Yeah, they can be quite dramatic.
Exactly. So, for example, in a podcast with co-host Ricky Williams, Stephen Forrest danced around saying the N-word, a racial slur. They were discussing shadow work. And before he kind of danced around with the word, and then he blurted it out to his co-host in a comical lament on the tight restrictions of political correctness now. And there was more to it. He claimed to be a descendant of Nathan Bedford Forrest, which was later denied, and spoke of some noble intent behind the establishment of the KKK. And as such, of course, the astrological community responded in a big way.
Yep.
I think when I saw it, I was floored. I didn't know as much about Stephen Forrest, being that, we're in traditional astrology realms, but I had, especially after attending my first astrological conference, NORWAC, this year, I noticed the strong presence of evolutionary astrology. And so it was really kind of earth shattering in a way to have this new avenue of astrology come into my focus and be like, oh, this is so interesting. And this is within the last couple months. And then, boom, the founding father of evolutionary astrology is, under scrutiny, for lack of a better word. So what do you think?
Yeah. I mean, we were talking yesterday about how, like, you have Mars in your 11th house right now. And, like, that really is showing about the sort of, like, friction that's, like, happening in your networks.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I have been thinking a lot about I mean, first of all, I myself don't have much exposure to like evolutionary astrology.
Right.
One thing that I really took from Stephen Forrest that I really liked was his framing of the eightfold lunation cycle. He relates like each moon phase to like the solstices and equinoxes and to the cross quarter days. Beyond that, I haven't had too much encounters with him. I think for me, I really like astrology as a sort of like grounded practice based on material empirical reality and observation. And I tend to be agnostic about anything beyond that. So I think for me, I have had a hard time resonating with EA in that respect.
I really think if we lean into what some of our esteemed colleagues say about the South and North Node, then that's when I really start to get excited about what eclipses mean, right? And so it makes me kind of grateful for our community and the fact that we engage in this like ongoing discussion on threads, on Substack, and we're constantly in this kind of conversation on the cosmos. And so with this being eclipse season, we've been discussing the North and South nodes. So let's talk about what some of our favorite astrologers that we know and admire and love say on the North and South nodes.
I love it. I love it. So, One way that I like to start talking about the nodes is that they relate to the moon. And they are the points where the path of the sun and the moon intersect. And the north node is when the path of the moon intersects with the path of the sun, and the moon, in moving zodiacally and moving in zodiacal motion, ascends above the path of the sun, also known as the ecliptic. And that has various symbolism. So the north node is called the ascending node, and the south node is where the moon travels below the ecliptic, starts moving down below. And the moon is related to this idea of fortune, this waxing and waning of fortune, this idea of like circumstance, body, contingencies, the ebbs and flows of life that we often don't have control over. And the nodes of the moon are often related to like increases and decreases with relation to fortune. And
Right.
oftentimes in like the ancient tradition, the North Node often had this almost like kind of like Jupiterian, expansive, amplifying quality. So oftentimes when the North Node was placed with a benefic planet, it would be considered uh, a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if the North Node was placed with a malefic planet, it would amplify the bad. So Abu Mashar talked about how he has this quote where, according to the most ancient of philosophies, the head, which is the North Node, the head of the dragon, is good with a good one, namely a benefic, and bad with a bad one. But the South Node, the tail of the dragon, is associated with decrease. So when you put it with a malefic, it can decrease the sort of like bad significations. It sort of has this like Saturnian quality of restricting. And the North Node, however, the South Node, when with a benefic, it would decrease the good. So that's one way of framing it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you see this throughout like the Hellenistic tradition. Um, and then in ancient Indian astrology, you have this idea of Rahu and Ketu, whereas the North Node is Rahu, the head of the dragon, and the South Node is Ketu. And similarly, it does relate to these ideas of like fluctuation within the material world, but also in this tradition, the moon is often more associated with like mind and like our desires, thoughts, opinions, emotions. So I love Neha, Astrology with Neha on Threads.
Mm-hmm.
She had this post from June where she said the South Node can be decrease, it can be a drain of focus, or also something rotting. It can be an emphasis on the intangible, the spiritual, and the material. And having the South Node like conjunct my ascendant ruler in my first house, I can relate to like both facets of it. And as Jolly Bodhi Mindful on Threads often says, the nodes are multivalent. So we want to bring in all of these different ideas and sort of like weave that into our delineations.
Absolutely. I had a couple of favorite quotes of mine from our beloved Threads.
Oh
I
yeah.
really liked Disabled Mystic said, Rahu corrupts the spiritual and increases the material, whereas Ketu corrupts the material and increases the spiritual. Both create compulsions. That was really deep to me. And then the esoteric butcher, also known as Devin, said the increase and decrease is rooted in the astronomy of the moon. After Rahu, the moon rises closer to the Tropic of Cancer or further north. And after Ketu starts rising towards the Tropic of Capricorn further south. So they're also shadows. So they enshroud and obscure. Rahu increases and enshrouds and is materialistic. Ketu does without and enshrouds and is ascetic. And then Word Witcher, Lauren Alexandra, said both are malefic more than not. And the trick is trying to reintegrate the axis. while constantly losing sight of it. Isn't that like, so I think that's really, there's, and it goes on and on and on. There's so much to be said about the North and South Node. But I think that um, ultimately, what do you think? You have the South Node in your first house, so you live that. What's your take on the South Node being kind of up close and personal with it?
Yeah, 100%. Well, I really want to go back to like Neha's
Mm-hmm.
framing about how the south node can be decrease, a drain of focus, or something rotting. It can also be an emphasis on the intangible, the spiritual, and the material. And I really liked a lot of the framings that you brought in, and I feel that like a lot of them really resonate. It is really complicated, and it goes a lot deeper than, oh, you need to like move away from your south node and into your north node, which is what evolutionary astrology says.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I have Jupiter conjunct the south node in Sag in my first house. And Jupiter is often a planet, particularly Sag has a reputation for like being adventurous, for like wanting to travel. Jupiter is often associated with wealth. Uh, and like, I feel that like, no, I'm a homebody. I rarely leave my local area. I love sleeping in my own bed. Like I have that Virgo moon. You know what I'm talking about.
Yes,
Uh,
absolutely.
and I'm not wealthy, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and once somebody said they saw that, like, oh, I have Jupiter and Sag ruling my fourth house, and they were like, well, do you come from a wealthy family? And I was like, no. And it's just like the South Node can sort of like drain that, you know? Like, I think that, like, instead of the more material manifestations of like wanting to travel, having wealth, what happens is that these things decrease. So that's a sort of like attenuation factor that you see with the South Node where it turns down the volume, but it also sort of like displaces it away from the material and into like the more spiritual. So it's like I explore through the mind, I explore through like learning different traditions, different perspectives. And that can also be related to like my Gemini North Node, where it's like there's this insatiable curiosity, you know? Um, but yeah, it makes the manifestations of my Jupiter and the sort of like Sagittarian qualities be a little bit more immaterial, a little bit more intangible, and a little bit quieter on the more material realm.
Absolutely. I think after a point, it gets hard to keep talking about the North and South Node, especially in terms of the eclipse that's coming up, without incorporating like what some of the in-depth meaning of the luminaries is. And so when it comes to like hidden knowledge and the magic of the sun, Ali A. Olomi has this sequence of pieces on his Patreon that are really exciting. There's one on the hidden magic of the moon and the sun. And so when he speaks of the sun, and the sun is kind of was my focus because we're talking about a solar eclipse in Leo, which is ruled by the sun, which is it's the only sign that's ruled by a star, by our star. So it just became like, okay, so let's dig into this sun thing, you know? And so when he speaks of the magic of the sun, Olomi breaks it down into themes of alchemy, prophecy, power of spirit over spirit. And it's kind of like the soul transforms our lower, baser self to the higher angelic self. And this is kind of the Islamic beliefs of the way the sun is a representation or a source of prophecy by way of the sun as it descends from the solar spirit source to the lunar fate and the body. And so we gain reflection and encounter the divine. And so with the unveiling of the hidden world of the sun, through the process of purifying the soul, it kind of reminded me of a Kazemi, actually, with like a planet being drawn into the orbit and clarified and cleansed. And it's kind of like we go through that process when we enter into communion with the sun and source. And so he talked about how true knowledge has four elements: self, God, hidden realms, and destiny. And so it's talking about all of these things, and how when you really get into your knowledge of self, how you're connected to source, and you get closer to source by way of the effort and the time you put in to getting to understand it, then it brings you closer to that hidden realm and therefore closer to the power of the sun. And so I thought that was really cool. And in contrast, the moon is much more, the hidden magic and the hidden power of the moon is much more about healing and about protection. And so it's definitely really interesting. They were talking about how the moon drives out the dark. You know, in the dead of night, the moon is what brings light. It reflects the light of the sun and is by way of reflecting onto the darkness, drives away and protects us in a lot of ways. And there's a lot of protective rituals and a lot of magic that goes along with the moon. The moon is the most magical and the thing that almost every society works with. Not every society worked with Venus or Mars, but everybody saw that moon up there and had some kind of relationship to it. So the fact that we get the sun and the moon together in this lunar moment, you know, at 20 degrees of Leo, it really kind of begs the question, if we incorporate what we know about the South Node, because this is a South Node eclipse, then if the South Node devours, if the South Node, I like to think of, mutes something a little bit, then I think what we can kind of surmise is that there's enough light between the both of them in the sign of Leo that it will still feel important and meaningful. I don't know. That's my thoughts. What do you think?
Yeah, wow. Um, I mean, I always think about, I mean, there's just something about like there being a South Node
Mm-hmm.
solar eclipse in Leo, you know?
Yeah.
Like it's the sign of the sun, and the sun is being obscured, it's being
Mm-hmm.
blocked, it's being occulted, you know? And sort of like relating to the idea of like etymologically eclipses are abandonment. It's like the sun goes away, but the sun is like in domicile. Like that's intense.
Mm-hmm.
That's intense.
Absolutely. It was interesting that Olomi mentioned when he was talking about the power of the hidden magic of the moon, talking about how there is a difference for the Islamic hit astrologers in when the new moon should be worked with. Like
Mm.
the new moon is actually the dark, and they wait until the first light, the first crack of light in the first sliver. And that's when you work with the new moon. And I thought that was like, that just kind of blew my whole world wide open. Like, oh my goodness, working with the new moon at first light makes so much sense because it's about the visual. And so, therefore, when we see the sun being blocked out, that visual is what really affects us. You know, they say that if the eclipse is closer to you, if it's visible where you are, it stands to that it's more powerful than an eclipse that's not in your area. But I think that's very interesting because when it is present, when it is something that we are privy to, there is definitely a response by not only us, but the whole world. So,
Yeah, so I think it's really cool that like you bring in the visual element, like that's super cool, and I think that that's how like the ancients related to it.
mhm.
Um, but to like pivot to like what you're talking about, I really like Jolly Knot.
Mhm.
Like Jolly Knot as somebody who really emphasizes the multivalence of the moon. And a little while back when we were getting, it must have been last year, she wrote this article about like a south node eclipse being a solar eclipse. And that it was a really great article. Yeah, so it's a master class that she took with Austin Coppock called Here There Be Dragons.
Yes.
And she talks about how in the course Austin says that a solar eclipse on the south node um generally has to do with like letting go of identifying with something.
Mhm.
And Austin says that there is usually a dissolution of part of the ego structure where we stop defining ourselves so much by what's going on in that part of our life. So like whatever like house topics are relating to. So like this upcoming eclipse will be in my ninth house. So like the ninth house has to do with astrology. So I'm wondering like how that's going to show up. But I also think that if we're talking about like the dissolution of like the ego structure and these whole solar themes of identity, um, and like self and persona, but also like visibility and performance, this being in Leo might be particularly loud, you know?
Now I'm going to pull up the Leo solar eclipse. It's on Wednesday, August 12th, 2026. I have 1:36 p.m. Eastern, and
Yeah.
they're both at 20 degrees and 1. And so let's get into it. Let's start with maybe the decan that this lunar event is happening under.
Yeah. So this is this decan. When we look at the decans, there are two different rulership systems where historically a planet has been assigned to each decan. And in each of those systems, and I'm not going to get into the technical bits of it, in both of those systems, they assign this decan to Mars. So we would say this is a double Mars decan. So if we think about Mars being in this Leonine space, which is about like solar prominence, and often the decans of Leo often have this theme of like working your way to the top, being visible, prominent,
Yeah.
being the center. Um, this decan, which Austin Coppock calls the banner, and which corresponds to the Seven of Wands,
Mhm.
is this decan about like defending your position.
Right.
So if the first two decans tell the story about like rising to the top, this decan asks like, okay, what do you do when you are at the top?
Yep.
And Mars, it's a Mars decan, so it's like you fight for your position. And so it's often with like the South Node being here, like it's making me think about like maybe we're releasing something and like letting go of something, but also just having a dissolution of something that is related to about like defending our position, defending our visibility, maybe themes about like leaning in toward like greater privacy or like feeling like, oh, I can let go of this need to perform in this way.
Yeah. I think about the Seven of Wands, and the aspect that jumps out to me is when Austin was talking about how the threat or the problem could be within, from coming from within or without. And so it's kind of like he's standing on on this hill defending his position, but then his socks are like mismatched. And like there's something, it's like he doesn't have it all together, it's like, he's fighting for his life a little bit, even though he's up on that level and fighting for his position and seemingly holding his position. But sometimes are we getting in our own way once we get to the top? I think is interesting, especially considering everything that's been going on right now, and what is kind of an archetypal story of a great leader, the rise and the fall of a great leader.
Yeah, 100%. Like, wow. Yeah. And like that's often one thing that Chris Brennan likes to emphasize with eclipses is that you'll often see like the fall of solar figures. And Stephen Forrest really has been that. Like he's has had this reputation for being this luminary within the astrology community, that his response has been to defend, right?
Yep, that's Seven of Wands.
That Seven of Wands. I'm looking at Kira Ryberg's name for this decan, and it's called Defend Your Territory.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Um,
And not to say that you shouldn't defend your, I mean, and there are a lot of different circumstances that, a leader or someone who has been victorious is defending their their position. And there's a lot of different ways that we can get in our own way and different levels to it, obviously, and different ways it plays out in our own personal lives. But the 12 parts, when it comes to this chart, the sun and moon are at the Aries 12th part, which is interesting because when you talk about the decans, the ruler is Mars. So we're still in this theme, this Martian energy. And so with 12 parts, what I typically do is look at the condition of the sign, that house. So I'm looking at Aries in the sixth house on this chart. And we have Saturn and Neptune. And I got to thinking about, ideals and progress. They're both retrograde right now. So I
wow.
think we're kind of reviewing our ideas. We're kind of reviewing the progress. This is very on the nose for what's been happening right now in the astrological community. And Neptune is being squared by Venus in Libra at 5 degrees in the 12th. So we're thinking about maybe connective things, Venus, that are unseen that we're kind of trying to bring in. There are things that we're seeing come out of the shadows in terms of where we really are and as far as our progress and our ideals of what we want this community to be and what we want our lives to be and how far we've come and how far we haven't come. So I thought that was interesting. When it comes to the 12th part, it kind of is very much in alignment with even the decans. And when I look at this chart, I also look at the rising because Ali A. Olomi in his talk at NORWAC was talking about how the first house, the helm, is an indicator of how this lunation will play out. And the modality of the sign at the helm is what really gives you an idea of how it will play out. For example, if it is a chart with a mutable sign at the helm, then these are effects of lunation that will kind of happen a little bit before and last a little bit after. You have more of that fade in, fade out of energy of the lunation. In a cardinal rising chart, you have very strong, but then very solid and then cuts off. Like you get the energy and then it's gone. It's not like you get the fade, you get just like start. So it's the beginning of, typically the cardinal signs are initiative. So you get that kind of push of energy. And then when it completes, it completes. And then we have the fixed signs. When you have a fixed sign on the horizon, it kind of implies that there are lasting effects from this lunation. So we have Scorpio on the helm. And I just thought that was really interesting because we have the lot of fortune, the lot of spirit, which I think that typically happens when you have the sun and moon together in a new moon in the 10th. And I think it really kind of speaks to the condition of the people and the power that we have to be introspective, Scorpio kind of, I think, is very uh, piercing, and with its ability to see through to the matter, find our resilience as a group, and find our spirit. We have a lot of spirit there too. And they're all conjunct with the ascendant. So I just think it really came together with this chart of the whole picture of what this moment is feeling like. And I think what it comes down to is not only how that feels as a group, but how it feels individually.
Yeah, wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Um, yeah, there's so much there.
Right.
Um, um, to piggyback on the whole like 12th part thing,
Mm-hmm.
the 12th part, so again, like you said, like the 12th part of both the solar eclipse and the upcoming lunar eclipse are Aries. One thing that is really interesting about this one is that the 12th part of this new moon eclipse is 0 degrees of Aries, which is where we had the Saturn Neptune conjunction.
Yep. Wow.
And so, I don't know, could you repeat the way that you framed like Saturn and Neptune being retrograde in Aries? It
I
was
think
really
it was
beautiful.
like it was the review of our ideals and how where we've come with our ideals, where we are and where we aren't with Neptune, and the progress that we've made in building the structures that reflect our ideals with Saturn retrograde.
Yeah, yeah, wow. Yeah, yeah. And well, it's making me think about like the seed moment that happened in February when the two conjoined at like 0 degrees Aries.
Yep.
And like we often think about, and Saturn and Neptune have been traveling together for like a couple years now
Mm-hmm.
because they were first in Pisces and now in Aries. And one thing that this the two together can signify is like the dissolution, Neptune of old structures, Saturn.
Mm-hmm.
And being in Aries, we really get this theme with Saturn and Aries of like old structures dissolving, being obsolete, and needing to be replaced by the new. And 0 degrees Aries really, and that's a double Mars decan too. So
Yep.
we have this whole double Mars theme of uh for this one, it shows up more as like the pain of birth, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like birth is painful.
Mm-hmm.
And like we are building a new world. And like it's making me think about how like this is a fixed rising. So it's really talking about something right now that is happening that is somewhat durable from what I'm gathering from like what you're saying. And like I'm seeing like we're already seeing so much of this that happened. Like Abdul El Sayed just won here in Michigan. Like Stephen Forrest like fell down, you know? And
Yep.
like one thing that Chris Brennan likes to emphasize is that oftentimes during eclipse season you'll see new figures come into prominence. But it's making me think about how like this is the continuation of the whole like Saturn and Neptune story where like there's been so much disillusionment with the system, you know? Like and this is when Saturn Neptune conjoin, it's about the disillusionment that comes from like seeing that the veil has been lifted on how shitty things are because like a lot of people um through these past few years have been coming to realize that like the system doesn't serve us. And but in addition to the dissolution of structures and the disillusionment, Saturn Neptune is the invitation to dream. And like with it happening at 0 degrees of Aries at the beginning of the zodiac, it does talk about like, oh, what kinds of new worlds are we building? What kinds of uh struggles are we initiating to make the dream manifest? And being a double Mars decan, it shows it's not without pain, it's not without struggle, it's not without fight, it's not without this idea of needing to sever from the past.
Right.
So I found that incredibly powerful. And then when we go to the next lunation, the 12th part of that will be at the very end of Aries. So I have it pulled up. It is going to be at 28 degrees of Aries. So the 12th part of the lunar eclipse. So The 12th parts really tell us some stories, you know?
Yeah, the Aries is like, I am part of the story. And I mean, all of the changes in Aries this year, it makes total sense. It's it's hard to talk about 2026 and where we are in the world in time without talking about where Saturn is and the fact that Saturn is with Neptune in Aries, and we're having this having to work so hard at structure building because Saturn is in its fall. And so that really it really makes a difference. I think it also goes into when you were talking about disillusionment and the ideals, it got me thinking about the bounds, because then we start thinking about, you know, the fact that this eclipse is happening under a Mercury bound ruler, I believe. Yep. And it's so many things happening in this chart. It's like
Yeah.
Mercury is also in Leo at 5 degrees, at a sextile to Venus, and closing in on Jupiter. And so we have this, I don't know, this it's coming into the conjunction, and it's kind of, we're getting insight and inspiration, the combination of the Mercury and Jupiter of it all. We haven't talked that much about the fact that Jupiter is in Leo for the long haul, not the longest haul, but at least for until next summer. And the fact that this is kind of an additional closing in and meeting of the planets when it comes to Mercury and Jupiter, and that motion is happening during this lunation is really powerful in terms of the power of our ideas, our spirit, our wisdom, insight. Those things are really kind of coming through. I mean, we're thinking of like the Scorpio rising. I always think of a Scorpio as like having that, being under a scope, under a light, and being, pierced, or a gaze that really sees everything, and can really delve into something, and find power in information. So I think that's really cool. What do you think about the bounds?
Yeah, wow. Yeah. Uh I I mean, like, I have Mercury and Scorpio natally, so like live that intensity, you know?
Yes.
Um but I think it makes me think about how um like there is a sort of like cognitive story to this where it's just like, oh, how do we process what's going on? Well, we're going to need to like think about it. We're going to need to talk about it. We're going to need to analyze it. Like if we're letting go of something, like we probably do need to do it through these processes, but it's also making me be like, okay, if the south node if it's a south node eclipse in Mercury's bound, does it mean that we need to like release something with like our attachment to thought? I don't know. I'm
Yeah.
just putting it out there.
Yeah.
But like another thing that I wanted to name that's like related to the bounds is that the ascendant ruler is going to be that Mars in the eighth house of Scorpio in its own bound of Cancer.
Yeah.
And it's exactly square the 12th part of the lunation.
Mm-hmm.
So there's so much there. How do
So
we
much to
unpack this?
unpack.
But to me, it speaks about like the struggles of building new worlds,
Yep.
like the 0 degrees of the cardinal axis, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and um and like Mars's bound of Cancer talks about how like you need to fight to protect, you need to fight for nourishment. What do you need to do to get nourishment? Um you need to like hunt, right? That's a very martial thing. And in order to nourish yourself, something else needs to be sacrificed.
Mm.
Um, but it also makes me think about how Mars being in its own bound of Cancer makes me think about how like love, intimacy, connection, relationship, which are all these very Venusian things, because this is a Venusian decan that Mars is in during this time. Well, these actually, conflict is part of it. And it's making me think about how that Venus in Libra, which is all about balance, harmony, justice, is
Yep.
going to be in that whole sign square with Mars. So it's like justice doesn't come without a fight. Justice doesn't come without the conflict necessary to establish right relationship.
Right. And it's powerful. It's a powerful thing. I can honestly say that as a Black astrologer, the moment when I logged on after work and saw um, Chris Brennan's take on everything that happened, I had logged on to Facebook and I was very discouraged, very, very hurt. It was that ruined my whole day, seeing some of the perspectives and some of the absolution. And that was a moment where I'm like, wow, the progress, Saturn retrograde is not the ideas that people have about what this means and what this signifies is not all in alignment. We're not all in alignment here. But when I logged on and I saw Chris Brennan's response, when I woke up and saw Channing Nicholas's response, when I woke up this morning and saw that the UAC has finally responded to say, we are holding to our code of conduct. That was such an emotional moment for me. Like, I think it really speaks to the fact that we have, it feels like tiny steps. We have a long way to go, but like these moments where we're pushing through, fighting our position, and really kind of protecting each other. That's what the moon, that's what Cancer is about. I think that is really an aspect of the moment that has been a roller coaster, but it's come out to be, this eclipse season has gotten really intense, but it's been some ups and downs, and that's an up to me. If that's the Mars at the Cancer 12th part, then that was like, as a mom, as a Black astrologer, as a woman, that was a moment where it was like, yes, thank you.
Yeah, wow. I think it also makes me think about how like Venus was in Libra when they announced this, and it's just sort of like this like breath, this sigh of relief, you know? Um, uh, and like it makes me feel like, okay, there's still so much work to do, and like my hope is that like we don't use this decision to like simply like rest on our laurels, right? The sun is in Leo 2, which Austin Coppock calls the crown of laurels, and like
Mhm.
uh it makes me it makes me be like, oh yeah, there's hope, and like there's this potential to like right the wrongs, and it's ongoing. And I think one thing that is interesting to me about this lunation chart is that Venus is in a kite with the outer planets. Like it's the minor grand trine of Uranus, Neptune, Pluto in air and fire, and Venus is activating that. And to me, that really highlights that like these outer planets doing their thing, and with like the whole Barbell basket. And it's interesting that like during this chart, Mercury is forming a basket with the outer planets.
Yep.
So it's like there are these like big apocal shifts that are going on, but with Venus opposing Neptune at the time, it's just like, okay, yeah, how do we dream to get justice? And like Venus Neptune can be illusion. Venus Neptune can be this like false sense of like transcendence and like merging of boundaries and like unification. So like we really do have to have a degree of discernment and scrutiny with this,
Yep.
but this also points to these sorts of deep shifts that we're seeing right now. And again, the work is never complete, and like we really don't want to like hype up things when there's so much more work to do.
Mhm. When it comes to um, eclipses and the responses that people have, If we turn towards, we can delineate the astrology of it. And if we're thinking about the reaction that people have to an eclipse, and not just people, but all of us, the world responds, to if it's visible, if it's something that we are experiencing. So, did you want to talk about that a little bit?
When we had this last series of eclipses, I wrote a piece for my Substack called Eclipse Season as Rhythmic Disruption. And I think I really wanted to pinpoint how we experience eclipse season and how it shows up in our lives. And so I wanted to read an excerpt from that piece. I posted this excerpt on my Instagram page, so I'm just simply going to read from that. So I write, throughout history, eclipses have been framed as these ominous, earth-shattering, cataclysmic things. And indeed, they can be very unsettling. But oftentimes, eclipse season simply shows up in our personal lives as a period of flux and indeterminacy, defined by disruptions to the normal, established flows of life. This can feel frantic, destabilizing, dysregulating, chaotic, and ungrounding. But it typically isn't the most massive thing to happen over the course of one's life. I thus want to bring eclipse season down to earth, framing it less in grand dramatic terms, but primarily as a period where the normal rhythms of life are disrupted. This isn't to say that it can't shake foundations in utterly profound or life-altering ways. But most of the time, the disruptions signaled by eclipse season are far from anything grandiose or catastrophic. I often think about how solar eclipses affect certain animals. You've probably heard reports of animals during solar eclipses behaving as if it's dusk. Crickets start chirping, fireflies become luminescent, birds stop singing and return to their nests, giraffes stop grazing and start running around, spiders destroy their webs, owls become alert, and farm animals return to their barns. I would like then to take these images of disruption within the animal kingdom as a metaphor for what happens to us during the roughly month-long period known as eclipse season. The sun moves at a steady clip across the zodiac, defining the seasons and years. It rises and sets at predictable times, with the days lengthening and shortening steadily as we cycle through the seasons. The moon likewise moves around the 360-degree zodiac once a month, waxing and waning predictably. Eclipses are disruptions to this. They dim the sun in the middle of the day, rather than allowing it to follow its diurnal course and dim the skies through setting. They darken full moons at a time when the moon should be at the brightest point in its cycle, dampening its luminosity immediately, rather than through the normal pattern of waning. Speaking from experience, I can say that eclipse season doesn't have to be felt in any acute or dramatically life-altering way. Nor does eclipse season have to show up in any particularly good or bad way. Things do tend to feel big, faded, and chaotic, but this is all on a spectrum. As Diana Rose Harper has said, eclipses are chaotic neutral. One way that I frame eclipse season is that it's a time where the rules of the game or the operating systems of life shift somewhat. This doesn't have to be major, though sometimes it is. Sometimes it simply inaugurates a simple but significant shift in routine. But generally speaking, when it comes to eclipse season, there's a quality of indeterminacy. Things feel unsettled, and there's an air of wild unpredictability. Just as eclipses can instantaneously dampen the light, a lot can happen during the short period of time that is eclipse season. Time speeds up. The density of events increases. The steady, predictable rhythm of life goes out the window and things get upended. Though, we might also see time slow down and contract with eclipse season, with the density of change altering our perception of time. This all can feel wildly destabilizing, but things eventually settle. It is this period of unsettledness that allows for new things to settle and move into form. And so that's what I wrote. And I think a lot of this resonates with what Jolly said, you know?
Diva, you ate that down. That was so good. Like even the way you wove in the way the animals respond and the way that it's in some ways it's like okay, it's just a thing that happens, but it's a time shift. It's the way that we perceive it. And so that makes me think about like when we were ancient civilizations, they used to bang pots and pans and shoot arrows at the sky. It got me to thinking about, and I'm going to try to tighten this up in one elaborate thought, that Rudolf Otto in his work, The Idea of the Holy, talks about the numinous, something other, something arousing spiritual emotion, mysterious or awe inspiring, something that allows us to experience the feeling of being submerged and overwhelmed by power. And it evokes a psychological response. And that's like now that we have like this shift in like the way time feels like it's happening and like we're feeling affected, then we get into how is our reaction different than just, you know, your animalistic response to an eclipse. And so Otto calls it the mysterium tremendous, the element of awfulness, like awe, A-W-E, awfulness, and being overpowered, excited, activated. And he speaks of the mysterium fascinon, which is experiencing something beyond your comprehension, something that is immeasurable, something that often becomes the object of our desire and yearning, and something that just activates people. Like I think of the last solar eclipse that I experienced. It was total. And I remember standing there and looking up at it, and it was incredible. And then I felt a chill. It got cold. And I was like, okay, well, wow. It was totally sublime. Like, it's like, all right, it got cold. I'm feeling like my body is responding. It's like that, you know, Otto was a religious philosopher. So obviously he's talking about a religious experience. But when you're looking at the sun being eclipsed and it's getting cold, you're feeling like this is that kind of encounter with what we call the numinous. And so Carl Jung speaks of the way we give it meaning to those things and with the collective unconscious, where we talk about like how we inherit paradigms that shape the way we see everything. The ideals and images give meaning to who we are, what we see, how we perceive it. And we inherit these systems of thinking about ourselves, about society, and our experience of the world through storytelling. Through stories that we're told, through stories that we perceive in various ways, we figure out where we fit in the story. So if that's what differentiates us from animals, then when it comes to an eclipse, which is it? You know, we now know the science of it. We know what's happening. We know that the moon is coming between us and the sun in a solar eclipse. We know that we're coming in between the sun and the moon in a lunar eclipse. And yet there's still that element of wanting to shoot arrows at the sky. You know, we still feel that uncertainty and like question it. And is that the inherited reaction, the, you know, the collective unconscious reaction, that the stories that we've heard, or the impulse to do those tribal things that are maybe embedded in the fabric of our DNA? Or is it the power of the numinous? Is it simply just that powerful that we just, you know, have to respond? I don't know. That's the question. So I don't have an
Yeah.
answer.
Yeah, wow. Um, yeah, I like the last thing you said. I don't have an answer, you
Mm-mm.
know?
In conclusion, we don't know.
We don't know. We don't know. And I think it evokes like the awfulness, you
Yes.
know? Uh, my feeling is that it's like probably some kind of both and, you know? I feel
Mhm.
like the way that the universe works is so mysterious.
Yeah.
But one thing that I love about astrology is that it really does tap into a sort of like ancestral memory, a sort of like collective consciousness. And it makes me think about how like you spoke about how new moons, how oftentimes people will go on the visuals of it, you know? We see the crescent, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And
Mm-hmm.
it makes me think about how like just learning that simple fact about it, and like being and having astrology be a means of connecting with the visual sky,
Mm-hmm.
can tap us into a sort of deeper ancestral connection.
Absolutely.
Um, but yeah, I do think that like there is something that's powerful about like just like on a physical level about like the the moon blocking out the sun, or like the earth moving in between them. Like something physically happens in the world. But why is it that like during this whole month long period, time speeds up or slows down? Like,
Mm-hmm.
why is that? Why is that like I go into eclipse season with like one routine
Mm-hmm.
and go out of it with another routine, you know? Why is that?
Yeah. It's like the way you were talking about time stretching. It's almost like that moment of the sublime of like when you're looking up at the eclipse and you're feeling the shifts in the world around you. You're hearing everything get quiet, or the birds start chirping, or you start to experience this on a sublime level to where like it's almost too much. And the eclipse season is like that kind of moment stretched out. Like it is that moment of the sublime experience of looking at it and experiencing it. But it's like over that course of time from the beginning of the season to the end. And I think that's where the portal is. I don't know what I mean by portal, but
Yeah, yeah.
but you know what I'm saying? Like that's where we kind of dance in between, you know, experiencing that thing and the way that it changes us, the way that it transforms us. There's always a transformative aspect of it, you know? So,
Yeah, I mean, I think that like the way you phrase it is perfectly, and I know that like sometimes we will balk at this word portal, but like, what is a portal? It's just a door.
adore.
It's just a doorway that you go through,
Yeah.
and um, it just makes me think that that you leave one room, go into another, you know, and that's what eclipse season feels like,
Mm-hmm.
and I love this idea that you're talking about how like we experience eclipse season as sublime, or the eclipse itself, the moment of the eclipse as sublime, numinous. It takes us outside of time, and that itself describes the quality of the entire month. Like,
Yeah.
yes,
Period.
yeah, yeah.
So, what are you going to be doing on the eclipse? Like, do you have any like processes or rituals, or like I kind of mentioned before, I've been taught along the way that eclipses, we shouldn't work with them. But now I'm thinking about Carl Jung in the way he's saying these are just archetypes or programs or ideas that we get, somehow we're a little bit afraid, we're a little bit unsettled. There's drastic changes happening. And so therefore we're like, don't work with this moon. Is that, is that a projection that we're getting from the way people perceived the eclipse? Or is that really a thing that we should observe? I think releasing this podcast on the day of the eclipse will be telling. So,
Yeah, totally. Totally. I mean, it's kind of chaos magic if you're going to choose to do work with eclipses.
yeah.
Um, I remember when I launched my public profile in Natty Astrology,
Mm-hmm.
I launched it the day after an eclipse.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want to like do it the day of the eclipse because I was just like, no, because like I don't want the sun to be blocked out, you know? I don't want to do it like during the eclipse. But even doing it the day after eclipse like brings in that chaotic energy, you know? And like I chose a really good election for it, you know? Like there's a really good election. The eclipse was in Aquarius, but then the moon was in Pisces, ruled by Jupiter in Cancer. So it was really lovely. It was a really lovely election. But I often think about how I use that because like that sense of like hunger and acceleration and chaos and wildness with that North Node eclipse. I kind of needed that because like I can be this very measured, forgoing person,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and for me, it was helpful to like tap into that.
Yeah.
But this time around, I'm just like, I'm kind of just gonna hunker down. I'm just gonna kind of lay low. Because sometimes astrology, even if you don't catastrophize it, sometimes astrology does have this vibe. Okay, you're just gonna batten down the hatches. You're gonna lay low. So oftentimes I recommend take the day off work.
Yep.
If there's gonna be an eclipse, take the day off work. And I remember one day like I did a reading during an eclipse for somebody, and it's just like it was like during an eclipse, and like just like the my contact with the that sort of channel of gnosis just got cut off.
Mm. Somebody pulled
So
the plug.
like I just feel like and sometimes like eclipses can feel like major downloads, but it was just like, oh, a luminary is being blocked out, you know?
Yeah.
Like so
I
I
think
would say if you are going to work with them, use some discernment.
yeah.
And I don't recommend using them all the time to work with all the time. Most of the time, you just let go, let God observe, let it just wash over you, you know? We don't really have control. Eclipses teach us that we don't have control. And I feel like there is a degree of humility before it. And sometimes we do need divine intervention to like break up patterns and stuff like that. And sometimes it's not our own will that accomplishes things. Sometimes it's just like fate, circumstances, or divine intervention. And I think that that's something that eclipse season teaches us.
Absolutely. I think you're spot on. You know, working with the moon, just be prepared for whatever. So, and on that note, I want to thank you for having this conversation with me on eclipses. And stay tuned to hear more from us in the next episode of A Lot of Fortune. And have a happy eclipse.
Happy eclipse, y'all.